Hi, um, Stefan. How are you doing this morning?
Just fine. Air and water show weekend here in Chicago, so I apologize if there are fighter jets going overhead. They're practicing.
Okay, no problem. Um, well, I know our objective today was is to have a discussion about the evolving landscape of admissions and varying admissions policies in 2025 Um, I'm Mark Skoskiewicz, founded MyGuru, gosh, what, 10 years ago. I don't know if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself for anybody that might be listening.
Yeah, I'm Stefan Maisnier. I've been a partner in MyGuru also for almost 10 years now, and I help folks get into their target schools basically at any level, whether that's high school, if you're looking at selective high schools, college, graduate school, law school, uh, doctorate programs, anything of that nature. So I've got a lot of experience handling the changing tides of college admissions and how application exams fit into that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is our second, but we're trying to make a series of discussions about this topic and adjacent topics. So I just wanted to start. I know you've been sending me links to articles recently about how things are changing, a lot of pressure from the federal government on elite colleges to behave differently, make things more transparent. So my first question is, when it comes to like the students and parents themselves, how much, how many questions do you receive? What do you think the level of knowledge is amongst the people actually going through this process right now?
Incredibly low. And as far as transparency goes, regardless of political inclination, there has been way too little guidance from institutions of higher education over the years as to what students should be doing. And unfortunately, you end up with what may be known as analysis paralysis. So the idea of, well, I've got test waivers, right? Can I get into college without an exam? Can I apply with the ACT versus the SAT at the undergraduate level? Should I apply with a GRE or a GMAT at the business school level? And there's just a constant drumbeat of people asking, well, what's the best test for me? And unfortunately, because of the opacity of college admissions, it's been left up to the student, and in some cases the parent, if we're talking about the high school level, to kind of try to decide. And they're certainly not experts in this. So one thing that I hope will come out of this is a little bit more decisiveness from colleges at the undergraduate, at the graduate level to say, hey, this is what we want. Here's what we want you to do. Here's what your targets are, as opposed to what has been an unfortunate system in at least certain areas where it's just been do your best. And it doesn't really help the especially adolescent or teenage minds who are like, okay, what's my best? So that's to answer your question, there's very little knowledge about it. There are more politically active parents or applicants who may be on one side of the debate or the other. But my position is if there's more clarity for applicants, that's a good thing. More options has not necessarily led to better outcomes. So if there's more certainty around what colleges expect, that's fine. And unfortunately, when it comes to the standardized test, whether it's again the ACT, SAT level or the graduate LSAT, GRE, GMAT level, the ambiguity, while it sounds great to say, hey, you know, your score is a holistic part of your application, you're not doing your applicants any service if you're making them believe that, say, a 145 out of a 180 on the LSAT is a viable score for a top 14 school, or to say that the Ivy League is going to consider somebody with an 800 overall SAT score. Instead, you should be driving those students to be better, help them with the prep tools that they need. And there's plenty of stuff out there today, even for free. But you've got to be honest with folks. And I think that that lack of just clarity has led to a lot of uncertainty for applicants, parents alike.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know, I think the direction of travel seems to be a lot of pressure to make sure that um, things like legacies or race, these factors that the current administration is really pushing against, that it's transparent whether those are being used, or in some cases they're not allowed to be used anymore. So it leads you in this direction of, oh, well, we're going to have to be using things that are as objective as possible. And I think test scores is one of those things. And I think I'll give a kind of a rambling question for you. I think that's there's a debate to be had about that, because I do think when you look at certain types of applicants and where they came from, a certain test score is more impressive, relatively speaking, than somebody from another background, and I think that's the whole debate. But at the end of the day, my question for you is, so the test scores are going to be made more important. And in your experience of having done this for so long, are certain types of students really at that much of a disadvantage relative to others who can maybe spend unlimited funds on test prep?
I still maintain that the standardized tests are actually the most egalitarian part of the entire applicant process. I mean, I'm not going to pick on you, Mark, here, but I believe you've got kids that do like ice sports. Ice sports aren't available to inner city kids in Los Angeles. They just aren't. I mean, sure, the NHL has put a lot of money into trying to build out hockey in, Anaheim and things of that nature, but you're going to have to pay for equipment. It just is a fact of life for a lot of these extracurriculars. That's less egalitarian than a test that anybody can prepare for. So I always have felt that when people have attacked the standardized test as the unfair aspect of the college applications process, it really is the tail wagging the dog. It's capitalism. That's what's unfair, is capitalism. Because again, if you've got, and we're here in Chicago, if you've got a student up at New Trier, which is one of the highest rated private institutions in the country, versus someone inner city Chicago, they're going to get a completely different college or high school experience. They're going to have access to different classes. They're going to even have a different GPA scale in most cases when we're talking about weighted and unweighted GPAs. So the idea that the exams are unfair in a way to students that don't have access to things, well, they do have to probably be more motivated. That I'll agree with. They're not going to have the same level of prodding that some of the more affluent kids will have, where their parents are like, you have to do this, keep doing it, and I'll throw money at it. But if they are motivated, there's more available content today to prepare for the SAT or the ACT or at the graduate level, any really level, even professionally. So you can find it. Is it as easy? Absolutely not. But it's going to be easier for that student in South Central Los Angeles to improve their SAT score on their own than it is to suddenly, pick up and end up at Choate in New England. So it's that piece that I think is being missed. And the idea of like releasing the scores are still going to be only part of it, and your score can tell a lot of different stories. If you're that student who is in an underfunded public school and you can show an SAT improvement from say 1,100 to 1,200 to 1,350 over the course of say 3 test waived cost waived test administrations, is that more impressive than somebody who took it one and done out at a country day school in Maryland and got a 1,450? Maybe. And that's the story that you can tell by showing the level of perseverance. So one of the things that I tell students all the time, and their parents as well, is you don't want to just look at the score. Look at what the prep work can do by showing a level of determination, perseverance, and an ability to learn. It can teach you to even just be a better student. And in an environment where essays, we just basically, I think, are going to have to expect they're being written by something that isn't just the student and the applicant at this point, unless they're being like literally judged in a like video conference or a proctored environment. You got to assume that it's going to be helped by ChatGPT or something of that nature. And honestly, you've had Grammarly and those sorts of things for years. But a standardized test, you have to take it with a proctor and you have to react and showcase your abilities in a live setting. That's going to show more understanding of concepts than anything else is in an era where you can't necessarily trust that the student created the content themselves. And again, this is not entirely new. I cannot stress that enough for anybody who might be watching this. I've had students over the years, and I think I brought it up to you on a couple of occasions, where I've had parents literally call me and just say, we want you to write our application essay for, our kid. And my response to that always has been, no, won't do it. Don't believe that it's moral, won't do it. But I know that there's somebody else that will. So that kind of problem has always existed, but it's becoming more acute today. People are more aware of it because of the proliferation, really more than anything else, the marketing aspect of these AI tools. I really don't understand what they're all that useful for yet, but people keep on saying they're going to be the next big thing. I remember the metaverse. Where's that thing? So it may or may not be important, but those standardized tests, again, are going to be the most equitable thing at the application level because everyone has to take the same general version. They're adaptive by the performance, at least the SAT now is to match what's happening at the graduate level with the GRE and the GMAT. So it is by far the most comparable aspect of the application, whether your student is applying in Boston, Bombay, or my hometown of Benicia, California.
Yeah. And I think, the challenge will be, you hit on this topic a little bit, but if you increase transparency and start making it very clear what all the factors are, and how to publish those results, the challenge for the elite universities or any top university, I think, will be to push back on the notion that if a certain student scored a 34 and another student scored a 26 on the ACT, which, as a reminder, that exam is on a 36-point scale. So that seems objectively to suggest that one student is far better prepared than another student.
Well, just because you're 6'9" versus 6'2", does the 6'9" mean you're better at basketball?
Right.
It's just one aspect.
It's one aspect, and even like in that situation, depending on where you came from to get that 26, that's what you need to be speaking about in your essays. That there's going to be the rigor of your classes. I think we both firmly believe in what you were describing as the egalitarian nature of these tests. Everybody takes the same test. It is also true that if you come from a certain background, your starting point is that test might be much easier for you. You've just been exposed to the concepts at a certain level, but that other student still has the same opportunity to do very well on that exam. And it is not something that requires the dedication of 6 months and 40 hours a week to do well.
It should not. It should not. And the bottom line is that if you drop a student who is unable to do the basics of math or the basics of English grammar in a freshman composition class or a statistics class at Harvard, they're going to fail. So you don't want to put that student in a position where they're not going to succeed either. Allow them to go to the level that they are ready for. It's fine. Not everybody needs to go to Harvard or Yale. I've had the benefit of teaching both at Northwestern and Northeastern Illinois University here in Greater Chicagoland. I love teaching at both. It's a very different set of populations. There's a use for both. One's a commuter school, one's globally renowned. That's okay. You don't need to be setting these expectations of only this is going to be acceptable. As long as you're progressing, you're doing great. And as long as you don't take a rejection as the end of the story, you can end up, again, let's say here in Chicago, you've got a student whose SAT score, they improve it, but it's not good enough to get into Northwestern. So they end up at NEIU. They do great at NEIU for 2 years. Then they transfer to Northwestern. That is certainly a viable approach. There are so many different roads to take, and I will say that the internet doesn't necessarily help with this, because at least on a weekly basis, I have to tell some student that I'm working with, stop reading Reddit. Just stop. Don't read anonymized tales somewhere and believe that that's going to impact you. It doesn't. It's biased by nature, and people are only going to be talking about the great things or the awful things. It's never going to be mundane. So the idea that you can go and become a transfer student probably isn't going to show up there. But if you're thinking about it from a perspective of, we want to know where these kids can go, that level of certainty, giving them options that are realistic, is better than telling somebody who's got, to use your ACT example, a 20 across the board on the ACT, that they're ready to go be an engineering student at Purdue, which has a great engineering program here in the Midwest, is probably just false and not setting them up to succeed. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that's just the truth. It's okay to not be ready for something and understand that you can improve and be ready for it later, especially if you're, only in your teens or your 20s and going for your next degree.
Yeah, I definitely feel like there's a sense in which test scores as a factor to level the playing field. That sounds like the complete opposite of what you tend to hear. Even you had referenced college essays and the use of AI earlier. That's another factor that could possibly level the playing field, because everybody, if you have access to the internet, I realize that everybody does, but it's something that everybody has access to, and so it's using it the right way.
Yeah, and the thing that AI is going to allow, and it's going to allow things very differently for different people, is it really is unfortunate, and this is what you're going to see, I think, with a lot of people who use AI too much in their essays. Your essay is going to read like everybody else's. That's just how it works. And it's never going to ask you questions that are going to allow it to learn more about you, basically, at least not in its current state. So you're going to end up kind of driven towards what every other essay that it's ever been able to pull out of, its large language model. You're going to sound like everybody else, and you will sound like an erudite version of everybody else, but you're going to use those words that indicate AI pretty clearly. So is it getting better? Sure. Will it continue to get better? I suppose. But it's never going to be as personalized. And that's the thing that comes across. It's really the corporatization of a lot of language. When I do work with folks on the application side of things and deal with their essays, almost all of them use a ridiculous amount of passive voice. That is AI writing. It's not, I do this, I do that, I did this, I will do that. It's more, the things were done by Stefan, which just doesn't have the impact on people when they read it.
Yeah. I guess in closing, what are your major takeaways from all of the commotion happening right now around the Trump administration and pressure on the colleges? What's your parents' takeaways?
When parents are, anybody is, just think about what you're reading as opposed to just falling into catastrophizing on either side. There's a reason that people are acting the way that they are, and there is a level of disconnect from higher education to the rest of the population. There just is. And I'm somebody who's got a couple of degrees that, come from nice places, as are you. But at the same time, I've got to say, Northwestern has like an annual fight with the city of Evanston because it doesn't want to pay taxes. It just does. So these kinds of things are real issues within the communities that they theoretically serve. So figuring out how to get them to better serve the community, if you think about it from that perspective, is not necessarily a bad thing. Now, at the same time, if you're going, I don't want them to cut funding for things just, with a hacksaw, I understand that position too. But if you're an individual parent or an individual student, all you need to focus on is, do you want to go to this school and how do I do it? Everything else is noise. Don't allow the noise to impact how you're going to craft your application and how you're going to make your statistics as compelling as possible. You've got to go out there and say, you know what, rather than looking at how can I get a test waiver, how can I go to a school that doesn't require the GRE, or how can I go to a school that says that it's minimizing the impact of the SAT or the ACT? You want to look at it and say, you know what, I'm going to do my best. And that's how you know that you've kind of maxed out. You're going to force yourself, and you're going to learn about yourself through the activities. And especially the SAT and the GMAT, with the changes that they've made, and the LSAT to a degree, but the LSAT's always been the same way, just removing the logic games. They are testing skills that you should have at the next level. You really do want to understand how to translate word problems into algebra if you're going to college. You need to understand how algebra works. It really is underpinning like a whole lot of how we just solve for unknowns as a species over the last 2 millennia. If you're looking at the GMAT, you're looking at, understanding how arguments work, being able to read summaries of information and glean the most important facts, like it was some sort of RFP, for instance, request for proposal. And then at the LSAT, you're actually learning how to read precedents and try to apply that to future arguments. So these exams have been designed very well. And one of my least favorite things, going back to when I first started this, test prep thing more than 2 decades ago, I'll never forget, like early on in my training, they're like, just call it a stupid test. And it's, that you just have to get better at the test. Well, that level of cynicism is bred for more than 2 decades. And it makes people already have an adversarial relationship to the exam, just being like, who cares about this thing? That's the wrong perspective. Look at it as something that you can get better at. And by learning the skills, you'll actually be able to understand how numbers, for instance, work a lot better. I actually used the example of a young man not too long ago that he came in for GMAT instruction. And the guy told me that as a consultant, he always has Excel open so that he can do the calculations in Excel. I went, if you did that with me, I'd fire you on the spot because you don't understand how numbers work. And I mean at a philosophical level. You don't understand just how quickly rates compound and that sort of thing. So that's what these tests give you, is an opportunity to learn skills that will actually serve you beyond test day. And if you understand that you're never going to know in life what the exact question being asked is, but you can build skills that will put you in position to react appropriately. Again, it's an arbitrary, somewhat artificial structure, whether it's the college admissions exams or the graduate ones, but you don't have the questions in advance. And life is like that. So when you don't have the questions in advance, it forces you to be a receptive participant in the activity and be like, okay, this is how I would react based on the learning that I've achieved over time and the skills that I've built. So that's what I would tell everybody is, don't worry about the noise. The noise has no effect on you. And if anything, the noise is only going to get louder. I've said this to different people at different times. The University of California system is still, I believe, the only one as of this recording that has a test blind official policy for undergraduates. They hired as their chancellor the former head of the University of Texas, where they definitely have been test mandatory. I am purely speculating, but if you hired a guy who ran a test mandatory program at one university system and brought him to a test blind one, I'd be shocked if they're still test blind in the long term. It's just the way the winds are blowing. And you also have to compare that against whether or not people are going to view your schools as less rigorous because you don't have a demand of, to a degree, meritocratic excellence. And especially if we're looking at the flagships in California, Stanford has a demand. There is no test waivers for most of the programs at Stanford any longer. You have to submit a test. If over time you've got kids going to UC Berkeley who didn't submit a test, and you've got kids that go to Stanford that did, there's going to be a perspective that Stanford's more rigorous. And whether that's valid or not for me to judge. But if you're not scoring one set, people are going to say that by not playing the game, you're kind of, using that old analogy of taking the fifth, and then they assume guilt.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. And I mean, my final thought, one benefit for people going through this process of all the pressure and the back and forth, the heated negotiations between the current administration and its elite colleges, is just having more transparency around the process and about how it all works will be better for students and parents. It is a weird situation when you know a test is important. You don't actually have to submit it. It almost seems as if it would be crazy not to. There's other factors. It'll just be helpful, I think, for a little bit more.
And
guidance.
Sticking to one set of rules would be nice as best you can, right? And so that's again, knowing that it's just this test, right? And you've got more and more just splintering, and it's going to continue to change. I mean, you know, here in Illinois, they went back to the ACT as their high school mandatory test of record from the SAT for about a decade. Those are the kinds of things that you don't get to choose, right? So if you're a high schooler in Illinois, for instance, watching this, or a parent of a high schooler in Illinois, you may be like, well, we're preparing for the ACT because we're going to get a free ACT now instead of a free SAT. That's fine. I've got absolutely no problem with that. We know that the ACT and the SAT are interchangeable most times. But when the colleges themselves say, hey, don't worry about the test, well, then, of course, the students aren't going to, because they don't want to take the test. It's a high schooler. No high schooler wants to take a test, and I include myself in that. I remember when I was in, and I'll leave this as my last thought, showing just how diligent I was back in, 1999, 2000, whatever that was. They introduced standardized testing in California, and they gave it to the high school seniors in May. It was a really bad policy. I had already been accepted to the University of Southern California. I answered the first 5 questions and went played cards in the back of the room. That's how much high schoolers want to take a test. It's just nature. So it's up to the adults to tell them this is actually valuable. And if you can convince them of that, they'll learn a whole lot more than just how to solve for X and what the definition of abecedarian is.
Which, for the record, I don't know.
It's not really that important, but it's really, really old, as is much of the English language.
Well, I think we should close on that. Everybody listening can go look up that word, learn something today.
It's always a pleasure, Mark. Yeah, it's always a pleasure. And I know that in the coming weeks and months and years, there's only going to be more news with this, because, again, I do think that people are going to realize that this is the one thing that AI can't make a kid do.
I agree. Have a good rest of the day.
All right, everybody. Take care, and, avoid the Air and Water Show, or watch the Air and Water Show, depending on what you want to do.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening.